good soldier fights until the battle is won or he dies. Harsh words, yet fitting for the Christian life. Look at two soldiers of faith who understood that principle and what you can learn from them. Next on Grace to You. One was silenced by the sword, the other exiled. Yet the legacy of James and John, the sons of thunder, as Christ called them, lives on in the pages of Scripture. And by examining their lives, you'll discover that God uses people with all sorts of personalities and all sorts of flaws to do a great thing. And that's what he's still doing today. On this edition of Grace to You, John Macarthur continues his look at the 12 people closest to Christ, people known as the Master's Men. And these lessons on Christ's disciples are showing how they were called and refined and empowered by the Lord, helping you see how God uses ordinary people for extraordinary goals for his kingdom. And now with today's lesson, here's John Macarthur.
James, the son of Zebedee. Several incidents stand out, and I'll show you where James is mentioned and the way he acts. In Matthew 20. Very often, zealous people are also ambitious people. They're very goal-oriented, very task-oriented. Then came to him the mother of Zebedee's children with her sons, and they're dragging along on her skirt tails, and they wanted something, and so she says to the Lord, grant that these my two sons may sit, the one on the right hand and the other on the left in thy kingdom. Would you put my boys on the two thrones next to you? I mean, the implication is, it's obvious to you that they're the cream of the crop, isn't it? A mother, right? My children are gifted. Isn't it apparent? I mean, we can see it. Zebedee and I. I mean, and they're the ones who have the zeal. You say, what about Peter? Listen, Peter had a lot of zeal, but he also had some problems. I mean, he would deny and bail out. James didn't seem to have that same problem. Peter faltered here and there, but it seems as though James was just resolute. He was dead in 14 years. They got rid of him fast. He didn't knuckle under at all. He didn't equivocate. He didn't compromise. And boy, he could see his ambition. I'm going all the way for the kingdom, man. And not only to the kingdom, but right to the right hand. And Jesus says, you don't even know what you're asking. Can you drink the cup that I'm going to drink? Oh, sure we can. All right, you will. In verse 24, the fever pitch was reached in the argument over who was going to get what in the kingdom. They all started arguing. And Jesus went into a little lecture on what real leadership is. But they were ambitious. James was ambitious. This is a terrible thing for them to do, to arouse the spirit of rivalry, to clamor for honor from the Lord. These who were the persecutors of the Samaritans are now ambitious, self-seeking place hunters, stalking the favor of the Lord as if he were some despotic ruler who could dispense his patronage on some kind of principle of favoritism. They were demeaning Christ and his kingdom. Well, James had zeal. He had great fervor. He knew the Lord's special interest in him. He was in the inside group. He felt he ought to have an equal reward for all of his capability. And the Lord reminded him, you'll get a reward, James, but it won't be what you think. Before you get your throne, you're going to get a cup, and you're going to drink it all away. And the cup is suffering, because the way to the throne is always the way of the cross. And James, as I said, 14 years later, got his request. He wanted a crown. Jesus gave him a cup. He wanted power. Jesus gave him servanthood. He wanted to rule. Jesus gave him a martyr's grave. Look at the one incident in the Bible where he appears alone, Acts 12. Now, about that time, Herod the king stretched forth his hand to vex certain of the church. And when Herod wanted to attack the church, he went right for the main guy, and he killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. That's who you go for first. And he put Peter in prison. It was James he was after, the son of thunder. He was filled with zeal. He was filled with ambition. He was filled with strong and intolerant feelings. He didn't like things outside his own sympathy. And Christ had to harness all of that and make all of that into something useful and make him a pillar in the church. What kind of people does God use? He uses the great leaders like Peter. He uses the quiet, behind-the-scenes, obscure, faithful people like Andrew. And he also can use the brash, courageous, ambitious, zealous, sometimes loveless, insensitive, selfish people like James. Because Christ brought his temper under control. He bridled his tongue. He directed his zeal. He taught him to seek no revenge and desire no honor for himself. And finally came to the place where James was willing to die for Jesus. So both the brothers drank the cup. For John, the cup was a long life of rejection and a death in exile. For James, it was a short flame and martyrdom. The Romans had a coin years ago, and on the coin was an ox. And the ox was facing an altar and a plow. And under the ox it said, ready for either. And that's how it is in service for Christ, and that's how it was for the sons of thunder. There is the moment dramatic sacrifice on the altar. That was James. And there is the long furrow of the plow. That was John. But both of them drank the cup. James had to learn sensitivity. He had to learn to quiet his ambition. But he did, and God used him. You know, a lack of sensitivity can just destroy a ministry. There are many people who try to serve Christ who are utterly insensitive to their congregations, to their families, to the people around them. One such man was a Norwegian pastor. His story is very interesting. He had a motto. His motto was all or nothing. All or nothing. And he went around preaching and hurling out lightnings and screaming thunders on everybody. He was stern and strong and powerful and uncompromising and utterly insensitive. I mean, they said that his people in the church didn't even care for him because he didn't care for them. He was so ambitious. He wanted to advance the kingdom. He wanted to uphold the standard of God, and he was just blind to anybody else. It came down to his own family. And he had a little girl, just a little tiny girl, who was ill. And the doctor said, you must take her out of the Norwegian